An official statement from the White House reports that the current administration will dedicate $1 billion in American Rescue Plan funds for the expansion of meat processing capacity. Today's video will provide a brief explanation of the independent meatpacking sector, a brief explanation of the President's $1 billion rescue plan, and finally, we will evaluate the historical effects of subsidies in the food sector to get a deeper look at what it means when the government begins to fund an industry. And also, guys, please use the link below to subscribe to my newsletter so we don't lose touch. As we outlined in the last video, Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and National Beef dominate 85% of the United States meat supply chain, having a combined weekly slaughter capacity of 1.6 million head of beef and pork, in addition to 92 million chickens. The remaining 15% of the supply chain is serviced by small-scale meatpacking operations. These small-scale meatpacking facilities fall under 3 inspection categories: USDA, custom exempt, and state. USDA meatpacking facilities are at the top of the regulatory scale. These facilities must meet USDA operating standards. In addition to meeting these standards, USDA meatpacking facilities must have a USDA inspector on site at all times. This agent will inspect the animal before slaughter, inspect the carcass after slaughter, and inspect the final cuts once they are packaged. As a small farmer, having your animals processed at a USDA meatpacking facility allows you to resell your meat nationwide. A custom-exempt meatpacking facility is at the bottom of the regulatory scale. Custom-exempt facilities are required to meet USDA operating standards, but no USDA agent is required to be on site during operating hours. The trade-off is that meat processed at a custom-exempt meatpacker cannot be resold. As a small farmer using custom-exempt meat processing facilities, you must sell the beef or lamb as a live animal. This is often done via shares where the buyer will purchase half or quarter of the animal from the farmer. The farmer coordinates transportation of the live animal to the meat processing facility, and the owner of the animal share will pay for processing and pick up the meat. Many market farmers will use custom-exempt meat packers, but doing so does pose some challenges in the realms of consumer education. In 2019, the PRIME Act was introduced to Congress. This would lift all interstate sales restrictions on meat processed at custom-exempt facilities. Unfortunately, the PRIME Act has made no movement through the congressional system, despite reintroduction in 2021. The third option is a state meatpacking facility, which mirrors a USDA facility with respect to regulations. The ultimate difference, however, is that meat processed in a state-inspected facility cannot be sold across state lines. Since spring of 2020, nearly every independent meatpacking facility has been booked up 12 to 36 months. Now, to define the $1 billion rescue plan stimulus to the private meatpacking industry. This $1 billion has 4 primary allocations: $350 million in aid to existing meat processing facilities, $375 million in financial support for projects with the greatest near-term impact, $275 million to make more capital available to independent processors that need credit, and $100 million in workforce training for independent meatpackers. According to a business plan put out by nichemeatprocessing.org, the cost of building an independent meatpacking facility with a weekly slaughter capacity of 4,000 head is around $3 million. If the $375 million in project grants goes to entirely new construction in this sector, it would fund roughly 125 small meatpacking facilities with a combined weekly slaughter capacity of 500,000 head. While it may appear to some that the input of funding into this sector would be advantageous, it's important to take a historic look at the impact of subsidies in the agricultural industry. Historically, government funding either precedes or accompanies government control. The first agricultural subsidies in the United States were introduced by Franklin D. Roosevelt. These took place in the 1930s in the wake of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. These subsidies were allegedly introduced in an effort to stabilize market prices and reduce soil loss. In the name of these two causes, Roosevelt's subsidies gave the federal government widespread control of the production of agricultural commodities for the first time in U.S. history. This control has not yet been relinquished, as nearly 100 years later, these subsidies are still being paid out under the Farm Bill at a rate of $20 billion annually. Ironically, the lion's share of these subsidies goes toward 4 crops that are among the most destructive to soil health: corn, soybean, cotton, and rice. In fact, the USDA soil portal states that the cost of soil erosion in the United States has reached an estimated $44.39 billion, with a recurring cost of $100 million annually. Another important thing to note is that the government does not ultimately fund these subsidies. We do, or our children will. The first solutions should be ones that cost nothing, and at present there are 2 bills that would significantly increase competition in the meatpacking sector. Number 1 is the reinstatement of the mandatory country of origin labeling. This will return transparency to our grocery store shelves with respect to meat imports. Number 2, removing restrictions on custom-exempt meat processing facilities through the passage and enforcement of the PRIME Act. Despite the fact that custom-exempt meat processing facilities are not under the same regulatory measures as USDA facilities, there have been no significant health citations since 2012. A third option is removing interstate sales regulations on meat from state processors. Given the fact that state processors and USDA processing facilities hold to the same standards, there is no reason why this meat should not be allowed to cross state lines. Ultimately, the personal solutions are the simple ones. Work the land in front of you, build the soil you stand on. As a buyer, learn and understand what it means to buy a quarter of a beef, and whether producer or consumer, remember these words: a government big enough to give you everything you want is strong enough to take away everything you have. With the facts in hand, please leave your comments below. How do you think this $1 billion will affect the meatpacking industry? And please watch this video next, where I talk about how to build soil without subsidies and how rotational grazing saved me $200,000.